The Uinta Mountains do not care about your plans. They are a jagged, ancient spine of rock and pine that stands as a testament to a world before man. At over 8,000 feet, the air is thin enough to starve your brain of clarity, leaving you with nothing but a primal sense of dread. It is here, in the shadows of the peaks, that the missing 411 phenomenon finds its most fertile ground. The silence isn't just an absence of noise. It is a weight, a heavy, suffocating presence that watches from the tree line. Cuberant Lake sits like a cold, dark eye, reflecting a sky that feels too distant to reach. It is a place of beauty, but it is a deceptive beauty that masks a predatory hunger. On a morning in late August, 2004, the lake was a mirror of glass, undisturbed by the ripples of anything living. The mountains surrounding it were a fortress of granite and subalpine fir, indifferent to the small, fragile lives moving beneath their canopy. You can feel the age of the earth here, and you can feel how unwelcome you truly are. The boy was 12 years old, full of life and the quiet confidence of youth. He was there with his father and a group of scouts. A weekend meant for bonding and the simple joys of the wilderness. But the wilderness is never simple, and it is rarely joyful for those who ignore its warnings. He had been fishing at the edge of the lake, his boots sinking into the soft, freezing mud of the bank. The water was a bitter cold that seeped through leather and wool, numbing his feet until they were blocks of ice. It was just after 8 o'clock in the morning when the discomfort became too much to ignore. He looked at his father and told him he was headed back to the campsite to change his socks and shoes. The camp was not miles away. It was not even a long walk. It was a mere 150 yards from where they stood. You could almost see the smoke from the morning fire through the gaps in the trees. 150 yards. A distance a healthy 12-year-old could cover in less than 2 minutes. His father watched him walk away, a small figure in a green jacket disappearing into the shadows of the pines. There was no reason for concern. No sense of impending doom. Just a boy taking a short walk on a familiar path. The sun was rising, casting long, distorted shadows across the forest floor. The father turned back to the water, expecting to see his son return within 15 minutes. But the minutes began to stretch, pulling at the fabric of reality until the silence became deafening. 15 minutes became 20. 20 became 30. The father stood by the lake, the first prickle of unease crawling up his spine like a cold finger. He called out his son's name, his voice sounding thin and weak against the vastness of the mountains. There was no answer. Not even the rustle of a squirrel or the cry of a bird. The forest had gone completely still, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. He began the walk back to the camp, his heart starting to thud against his ribs. He expected to find the boy sitting by the fire, struggling with dry laces or laughing at his own delay. But the campsite was empty. The tent was zipped shut. The fire was a pile of white ash, and his son's wet shoes were nowhere to be seen. The boy had simply vanished in the space of a heartbeat, in a distance shorter than a football field. The panic that follows such a realization is a physical thing, a cold, visceral knot in the stomach that makes it hard to breathe. The father and the other scouts began to scour the area, calling out into the darkness of the woods. They retraced every step of that 150-yard path. They looked behind every boulder, under every fallen log, and into every thicket of brush. There was nothing. No footprints in the soft earth. No snapped twigs. No scrap of green fabric caught on a thorn. How does a human being disappear in such a tiny window of space and time? The missing 411 cases often feature this impossible geometry. A person is there one moment and gone the next, as if they stepped through a door that slammed shut behind them. The searchers moved with a frantic energy, their voices echoing off the granite walls of the basin. But the mountain only gave back their own cries, distorted and mocking. It was as if the boy had never existed at all. By the time the sun began to dip behind the western ridges, the scale of the nightmare was becoming clear. The temperature in the Uintas can drop 40 degrees in a matter of hours. And the boy was missing his shoes. He was out there in the dark, in the freezing cold, with nothing but his thin clothing to protect him. The searchers felt the first bite of the night air, a reminder of how quickly the wilderness turns from a playground into a graveyard. Search and rescue teams began to arrive, a small army of professionals and volunteers equipped with the best technology man has to offer. They had helicopters with forward-looking infrared cameras, designed to pick up the heat signature of a living body against the cold ground. They had scent dogs trained to track a human through miles of rugged terrain. They had the will and the numbers to find a single child in a 150-yard radius. But the mountain had other plans. The dogs were the first sign that something was truly wrong. These were high-performance animals, capable of finding a scent days old. But when they reached the area where the boy was last seen, they didn't bark. They didn't pull on their leashes. They simply stopped. They whined and paced in circles, their tails tucked between their legs. Some of them refused to enter certain patches of the woods altogether, as if they sensed a presence that their human handlers could not see. Then came the storm. In the missing 411 archives, weather is often a sinister player, appearing out of nowhere to scrub the earth clean of clues. A massive, unpredicted storm rolled over the peaks, dumping sheets of freezing rain and hail on the search area. The wind howled through the pines, a predatory scream that drowned out the calls of the rescuers. Any footprints that might have remained were washed away. Any scent was obliterated. The mountain was hiding its work. One of the searchers, a man who had spent his life in these woods, later whispered about a strange sight he had seen through the rain. He described a shimmering in the air, a distortion like heat rising off a highway, but it was moving vertically through the trees. It had no shape, no face, no sound. It was just a ripple in the fabric of the world. He watched it move with a fluid, impossible grace before it vanished into the grey curtain of the storm. This is the Glimmer Man, a theoretical anomaly that haunts the edges of these disappearances, an entity or a technology that uses a form of optical camouflage to move through our world unseen. If such a thing exists, it would explain why the dogs were terrified, and why a boy could be taken within sight of his father without a sound. It isn't a predator of flesh and bone. It is a predator of light and shadow. Days turned into a week. The search expanded to cover miles of the surrounding territory, reaching into the highest, most inaccessible crags of the Uinta range. They found nothing, until they found the shoe. It was a single shoe, belonging to the boy, found high up on a boulder field that should have been impossible for a shoeless child to reach. It was sitting on top of a flat rock, as if it had been placed there as a grim trophy. The shoe was clean. It wasn't scuffed from a long walk over sharp granite. It wasn't caked in the mud of the storm. It looked as though it had been dropped from the sky. The searchers stared at it with a sense of profound wrongness. In many missing 411 cases, items of clothing are found in locations that defy logic, miles away from the point of disappearance, or in areas already searched multiple times. It is a signature of something that is playing a game we don't understand. The search was eventually scaled back, the resources exhausted and the hope fading like the autumn light. The official reports will tell you that the boy simply got lost, that he wandered in the wrong direction and succumbed to the elements. They will use words like hypothermia and paradoxical undressing to explain away the mysteries. But they cannot explain the distance. They cannot explain the dogs. And they cannot explain the silence. The father never stopped looking. He returned to that lake year after year, walking the same 150 yards, searching for a sign that the world hadn't just swallowed his son whole. He looked into the shadows of the pines, perhaps hoping to see that shimmering distortion again, to demand an answer from the void. But the mountains are silent stone, and they do not offer apologies. There is a thinness to the air in the high country, a place where the barrier between what we know and what we fear becomes transparent. We like to think we are at the top of the food chain, that our GPS units and our thermal cameras make us masters of the earth. But when you stand in the middle of a forest and the birds stop singing, you realize how small you really are. You realize that there are things in the dark that do not need to hide because they are already part of the shadows. This pattern repeats across our national parks and wilderness areas. In 1999, in the Poudre Canyon of Colorado, a 3-year-old named Garrett vanished in a similar fashion. He was walking ahead of a group of adults, turned a corner, and was gone. Years later, his clothing was found on a ledge thousands of feet above the trail. A place no toddler could ever climb. The parallels are chilling. The same suddenness, the same impossible locations, the same lack of evidence. The Garrett Bardsley case remains an open wound for those who remember it. It serves as a reminder that the wilderness is not a park. It is a territory, and in that territory, there are rules we haven't learned yet. We are guests in a house that doesn't want us there. And sometimes, the house decides to keep one of us. 150 yards. That is all it takes for your life to become a ghost story. So, the next time you find yourself on a mountain trail, and you feel that sudden, inexplicable chill, don't look back. Don't stop to check your map or fix your laces. Just keep moving. Because in the Uintas, and in the deep woods everywhere, the silence is usually a sign that something is watching. And it might be closer than you think. Much closer. 150 yards is a very short distance. Until it becomes an infinity. The case of Garrett Bardsley is just one page in a much larger, darker ledger. A ledger filled with names of those who stepped off the path and into the unknown. We look for patterns because we crave order. But some patterns are meant to warn us away. The missing 411 phenomenon is a map of our own ignorance. A guide to the places where the light doesn't reach. Stay on the trail. And never, ever walk alone. Even if you think you can see the camp. Even if you think you are safe. Remember the boy with the wet shoes. Remember the shimmering in the rain. And the silence of the dogs. The wilderness is waiting. And it has all the time in the world. To wait for you to make a simple mistake. A mistake that will lead you into the dark. Forever, the mountains are still there, standing tall and indifferent to the tragedy they hold within their stone hearts. Cubrant Lake still reflects the sky, its waters cold and deep, and somewhere in those pines, the truth remains hidden, wrapped in a shimmering veil that no camera can capture. We are left with the echoes of a name called out into the wind, and the memory of a boy who vanished in the blink of an eye. Watch the trees. Listen to the wind. And pray that the silence doesn't find you. Because once you are part of the pattern, there is no coming back. The missing 411 are not just lost. They are taken. And the thing that takes them is still out there, moving through the light, waiting for the next 150 yards. Good luck in the woods. You are going to need it. The end of a story is rarely the end of the mystery. It is merely the point where we stop talking and start listening to the sounds we ignored. The mountain hasn't changed. The trees haven't moved. But the way you look at them will never be the same. The boy is gone. But the warning remains. Don't trust the distance. Don't trust the sun. And never trust the silence. It is the only thing that knows exactly where he went. As you leave the high country and return to the safety of your home, remember that the world is much larger and more terrifying than we dare to admit. The Uintas are just one of many places where the rules of man do not apply. And every time someone disappears without a trace, the shadow grows a little longer. Sleep well tonight. And try not to think about what is moving through the trees while you dream. The pattern is there if you look for it. High altitude, granite, water, and a sudden change in the weather. These are the markers of the impossible. Garrett Bardsley is a name on a list that is growing every year. A list of those who went for a walk and never came home. The forest is a hungry thing. And it is never quite full. Respect the wild. Or become part of its history. Goodbye for now. But keep your eyes on the tree line. The Glimmer Man might be closer than you think. And he doesn't leave a trail. 150 yards. Just 150 yards. That is all it takes. The weight of the mystery is heavy. Like the granite of the Uintas. It sits in the back of your mind. A nagging doubt that the world is as solid as it seems. But as the sun sets and the shadows stretch out, we are reminded that there are places where the light simply fails. And in those places, the missing 411 are waiting. Waiting for someone to find the truth. Or to join them in the dark. This concludes the account of the disappearance of Garrett Bardsley. A story of a boy, a mountain, and a silence that will never be broken. Take care of each other out there. The woods are deep, and they are full of secrets. Full of secrets. Full of shadows. Full of the unknown. 150 yards. Never forget. Never.